Everybody, this is Perch. I've gotten this question a bunch lately, and I think it's in relation to kind of the perception of troubles that the MCU has had. And I say perception because it feels like the MCU struggling right now is factual. It feels like the last several movies, really starting from kind of what happened post Endgame. You had a couple of kind of high profile films. You have the kind of building around Kang as the big villain, and then that being a problem. And you've had the recasting or reshooting or rescripting or whatever the hell's going on with Blade being a problem. You have some of the Disney Plus shows not sticking the landing or kind of being forgettable. And by the way, everything I'm saying right now, I think is more, you know, objective and not subjective, but your mileage may vary. One of the weirder parts about comics and the MCU and kind of the environment in general is that you can find a way to have your own opinion about everything. But I think factually, if you just look at the dollars, if you look at the way movies have been received, you got Deadpool versus Wolverine coming out here fairly soon. By the time this video is out, who knows? It may already be out in theaters. But, and that movie's likely to do well. It's the only MCU movie this year. And I think there is a lot of logic to the idea that, hey, if you do a crap ton of Marvel movies in rapid succession, they don't feel as important. They don't feel as relevant or that you really need to see them. And no matter what it is, whether it's James Bond or Star Wars or Transformers or Marvel or DC or anything, the idea of scarcity helps. If you feel like, hey, I don't need to see that movie because there's going to be another movie 2 months later or a Disney Plus show or whatever, it doesn't help. You need to have the feeling of this is an event. This is something I need to see. Ideally, I need to see it on opening day. And after I see it on opening day, the movie was so impactful, I need to see it again. Like, those are all things that help, overall the movies land and do well. And Marvel doesn't have that vibe right now. They definitely did once upon a time. I think you'd be crazy to say they didn't. When Avengers, Infinity War, and then Endgame was coming out, there was a feeling like, I've got to see all the movies. If I don't see the movies and I don't see them all opening day, I'm going to be spoiled. I'm going to miss something. It's going to be a cultural event. I mean, all this kind of stuff. The movies really, really matter. And as time has gone by from Ant-Man 3 and, kind of the Marvels and all these other films that have come out, they lost that feeling. They lost the feeling of must see. In saying that, I don't think that opens up the door to, oh my God, the MCU is dying forever. It's definitely all going to shit. I don't think I'm not criticizing the content of the movie. Some of those movies were okay. Some of those movies were shit. I didn't enjoy Ant-Man 3. I wanted to really badly. I liked the microverse and some of the other things that were going on there. I think that there was some cool concepts there, and particularly as a guy who's read comic books for a long time, they were doing shit in that movie that, I wanted to see work. So the fanboy part of me was all in on it. But then the execution was screwy. The same thing with the Marvels. Actually not the same thing with the Marvels. I like Monica Rambeau. I was excited to see, Photon or Captain Marvel, Monica version or whatever show up in the film. I thought that was kind of exciting. And I wasn't looking for a weird buddy comedy with a singing planet. That wasn't what I was looking for. And so it didn't work for me. Maybe it worked for somebody, but clearly from the box office returns, it didn't work for enough people. So, I mean, in general, the MCU has kind of lost their vibe. This is a long lead up to ask a simple question that I got here, again, from a number of different people, which is to say, do the struggles of the MCU impact the comics? If comics are hurting, how much of that is due to the MCU, dogging it right now? And I give you all that disclaimer because when I've answered this question in the past or things around that, invariably I get somebody who goes, what are you talking about? The Marvels was great. Why are you a misogynist who doesn't like Captain Marvel? It's like, okay, you've altered the question so much that it can't even be answered at this point. And, again, factually, by revenue, by dollars, the MCU is not doing as well. That's again, that's not a debatable fact. The money proves it. Facts prove it. Now, maybe you love Phase 4, Phase 5. You're loving everything about it, and that's cool. That's your opinion. I've said this before on this channel. I like David Lynch. David Lynch does not make multi-billion-dollar movies. If I want to say I think David Lynch movies are the best in the world, I can do that. If I say David Lynch movies are the best in the world and they make more money than everything else, then I'd be a liar, because it's just not true. And that's really where we are with a lot of things, comics and pop culture in general. Star Wars is not doing as well, and as well as in quotes here, as it's done in the past. Once upon a time, the Star Wars logo and brand and content was, guaranteed, it was going to be the number one when it was out. Now, not so much. It's not guaranteed winner of a brand anymore. Now, does that mean that it should stop, or it should different things should happen? No, of course not. Of course the Star Wars brand, I mean, they should keep trying to figure out how to make that work. I mean, you'd be stupid not to. You paid a bunch of money for it. You should keep doing it. Same thing with Marvel. But does the MCU brand affect the comics? And here comes the next kind of shitty thing. And the answer is generally no. It doesn't hurt. So, for example, when the movies are ultra popular and, everything is going well, and, the movies are just red hot, I mean, it's helpful to the comics, but the comics have never really taken advantage of that fact. They should have, but they haven't. Generally, the comic books have been, I don't know, I'm going to go with marginal. They sometimes have mildly benefited from a red hot MCU, but generally not. And I say that again, not as a subjective opinion, but just as it's an objective fact. If you look at when the MCU was at its peak, comic books were not doing as well as you would think. And the reason behind that are the comic books often don't resemble the movies, or when they do, they so painfully resemble the movies that they're not interesting products. One thing that has never sold well, and I'm talking about this from a 40 to almost 50-year history, is when the comic books are products of the movies. Basically, when the comic book is almost a frame-by-frame adaptation of the movies, it doesn't do great. And this is interesting because manga and anime, when they're tightly linked together, they seem to do better. But in the US, comic books and movies do not do as well. The comic book needs to do more. When the comic book seems like a blatant attempt to kind of copy the movie, it's not hitting the same audience. It doesn't do well. Now, maybe part of the problem there is that the movie audience is able to go into any theater or watch at home or whatever, and the comic book equivalent of that has to go to the direct market, and they don't have that crossover. That's definitely a possibility. But look, I think that comic books, generally speaking, when they do the movie adaptation, they tend to use subpar artists. They tend to use subpar writers. It's not their best and brightest. It feels like an obligation on the part of comics, and comic fans, people who are buying comics regularly at the direct market, have an amazing ability to detect when they feel like they're being scammed. And what I mean by scammed is they feel like, hey, I'm not getting the best product. I feel like I'm getting a knockoff of, something that really is meant to be, like they're not putting, Olivia Capil and, pick your top writer. They're not. It's harder these days, but you're not putting your best on this title. Like if you were Marvel right now and you had Deadpool Wolverine and you've got this movie coming out in a little bit, why wouldn't you create a 12-issue Deadpool Wolverine go take on huge villains of the Marvel Universe and hire Sean Gordon Murphy to write and draw it? and just, he's got a bunch of pull from, comic fans and collectors. He's well known and people buy into his stuff. Why wouldn't you go say, hey, Sean, come do a 12 issue, balls to the wall, Wolverine and Deadpool, crazy adventure. And we're going to really take the most advantage we can off of this opportunity in the movies. Why wouldn't you do that? Well, they don't do that. And so as a result, you get what feels like a B or C product coming out of comics. And you'll get like a half-hearted Deadpool Wolverine thing, but it's not the best people. It's not people that move the needle. And by the way, I'm going to piss some of you off right now by saying this. I like the Kuberts. I like Andy and Adam Kubert. But from a sales perspective, if you put them on a book, it doesn't move the needle like, say, Dan Mora does, or Sean Murphy does, or some of these commercially high-profile artists that really make an impact. It just doesn't. I wish it did, because I love the Kuberts and I love everything they've done, and I mean, they are legends, and if you are paying attention to them, they're amazing. But for whatever reason, putting them or putting Mark Bagley or people like that on a comic, they're great. They do great work, but they don't generate hundreds of thousands of dollars of sales. Sorry, hundreds of thousands of unit sales, not dollars. Anyway, be that as it may. The sad part is the movies should be impacting comics more, but they don't. And again, it's because a lot of the collectors and the people buying comics today have given up on the idea that those two are linked. And I think that's potentially a bigger unlock or a bigger clue as to where things have gone wrong. It's hard to push a brand when you have to push each effort individually. Toys, movies, cartoons, comics. If each one requires an individual effort, it means you're not using that brand to its maximum potential. And I think that's something that comic books have to figure out. They got to figure out a way to leverage these moments in the movies better. But anyway, what do you think? Do you think the rise or fall of the MCU has a bearing on the comics? Let me know in the comments below. Like and subscribe, of course, because that's what you're supposed to say in these fucking videos. And thanks for listening.